This video is going to be exceptionally negative. Actually, I think it's the most negative video I've ever made. That being said, I want to start by trying to counterbalance some of that negativity by asking a key question. Who is Young Justice Outsiders meant for? In other words, who's the target audience? Well, the most obvious group of people are fans of Young Justice, the people who wanted it to return so badly and enjoyed the previous seasons. The other group of people definitely has some overlap with Young Justice fans, but there are also a lot of people in this group that probably haven't watched Young Justice. The people I'm talking about? DC Comics fans. Confession time. I've barely read any superhero comics. It's a medium and genre I want to engage with a bit more, but I haven't got around to it. Regardless of the reason though, the fact of the matter is that there's loads of these worlds that I just don't know about. And I know many of these characters I feel disconnected from in Outsiders are from there, from the comics I've never read, the series I've never seen. If I had read those comics, if I knew more about this world, well, then maybe I'd feel more connected to these characters. Maybe I'd be able to use my pre-existing knowledge of them to fill in the gaps, so to speak. I wanted to at least acknowledge that, as far as the wider DC Comics universe is concerned, I'm an outsider. As such, I'm not just looking for an adaptation of characters I know, I'm looking for an introduction to characters I don't know. That fact can't be removed from my experience of the show. And my experience is the only one that I can speak to. Well, with that out of the way, let's get to the review. I absolutely hated the second half of Outsiders. Okay, I'll slow down a bit. I mean, I should probably say what it's about first, right? The second half of Young Justice Outsiders picks up right where the first half left off. Tara's been rescued, but the heroes are still finding and freeing trafficked metahumans. Fortunately, many metahumans have been saved, but this prompts a new question. What happens to these powered people once they're supposedly free? Well, those heroes need to be taught how to control their powers. On top of that, they need guidance and hope. While this sounds like a natural extension of what happened in Outsiders' first 13 episodes, once again, the focus is shifting. You know how Beast Boy kind of popped up in episode 12? Well, now he's at the center of the conflict because he decides that he wants to work as a hero again, and that he wants to lead a team of younger superheroes into battle for all to see. This way, he wants to use social media to connect with younger metahumans, to encourage them and show them that there's hope. By episode 17, his team is formally assembled, and they're called the Outsiders. At its inception, the Outsiders consists of 6 heroes: Beast Boy, Blue Beetle, Geoforce, or Brion as I've been calling him, Static, Wonder Girl, and the new Kid Flash, who was previously known as Impulse. This might sound like a prime opportunity for the show to focus on a core cast of characters, like the first season did. However, that isn't the case. Instead, these 13 episodes juggle an ever-expanding cast of Outsiders along with Miss Martian, Nightwing, Artemiss, Will Harper, Black Lightning, Aquaman, Halo, Helga, Jace, the members of the Light, and many more. In addition, the characters end up in a large-scale conflict with Granny Goodness and, by extension, Apocalypse in general. But let's start with these first 6 Outsiders by asking an essential question. Who are they? Well, Beast Boy gets the most focus, so it makes sense to start with him. He's their leader, someone who wants to do what's best for metahumans around the world. As I've already mentioned, he wants to become a beacon of hope for people in need, specifically for metahumans in need. Brion also gets quite a bit of focus, though most of his stuff consists of him interacting with Halo and dealing with their now rocky romantic relationship. The other 4 heroes, though? They're here, I guess? They exist? I mean, the new Kid Flash is his usual self, tossing out some goofy quips and lighthearted remarks here and there to spice things up. Blue Beetle is also similar to how he was late in Season 2, cooperating with Scarab to do good, but we don't see very much of him at all. He's very much on the sidelines. Meanwhile, Static's primary personality trait is him saying,
I gotta get a girlfriend. Gotta get a girlfriend.
You gotta get a girlfriend.
As for Wonder Girl, I honestly don't know a thing about her. We just don't see that stuff. Of course, other characters join up as well, but I'll get to them more later. So why is this? Why do the founding members of the titular team of the season, by and large, get so little in the way of development? I've already mentioned these other characters who are getting focus, so that's part of it. But there's another issue. See, Beast Boy's way of achieving his goal of providing people with hope is to get people to follow the Outsiders on social media. Unfortunately, the social media focused scenes in this set of episodes are just let me describe it. In episode 17, a Reach warship attacks Brooklyn. Aquaman goes in to help, but he's handily defeated. So the Outsiders rush in. It's their time to shine. During their whole fight, a civilian takes video of them, commentating over it like a news reporter. Then another civilian joins in, saying stuff like,
Super amalgamated!
Later, yet another civilian starts taking video. They follow the action, keeping track of everything. First of all, the scene introduces something that's going to run rampant in every episode following this. A terrible representation of how teens use social media. Most of it is just cloying and gross. It feels like it was written by somebody who really doesn't understand how people use social media. What I mean is that for me, Beast Boy's showboating is insufferable. Yet seemingly everyone in the show just loves him. It creates this incredible disconnect between how I perceive these characters' social media antics and how everyone in the show seems to. And that's a disconnect I was never able to get past because so much of these episodes is about social media. Overall, the dialogue here is just wrong. Like the characters are mouthpieces for the next plot point. Like they're just running on rails towards the next story beat. It feels like everyone in the show loves them because that's how it was destined to be, not because that's the way the story unfolds. In other words, their popularity feels artificial. I find this stuff incredibly cheesy. Now I actually don't mind a bit of cheese. The other day I went to the grocery store and bought pretty much exclusively cheese, so cheesiness isn't in and of itself a bad thing. I sometimes enjoy shows, even non-comedy shows with dialogue, plots, or presentation that's a bit silly. However, Outsiders ping-pongs between serious and cheesy. For me, this results in severe tonal whiplash. For example, there's this scene where Clarion creates this flesh monster made of metahumans that should be horrifying, but at the same time we're getting that, he's saying stuff like,
"He cannot be constipated!" Yeah, contagious.
At a point, it just gets hard to take any of this seriously. In fact, that scene from episode 17 I described is another good example of this. See, this whole thing in Brooklyn is a big Scooby-Doo reference. Many of these characters resemble Scooby-Doo characters. Once these alien monsters are unmasked, they're actually human. Additionally, one of these captured villains talks about how they would have scored big if you heroes hadn't gotten in our way, speaking similarly to many Scooby-Doo villains who talk about how they would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids. If you found this funny, that's fair. But this has got to be one of the most obtrusive references I've ever seen. For the Outsiders, this is a serious mission. Their first mission. A chance to prove themselves to everyone else and really, themselves too. And yet this elongated reference turns it into nothing more than a big joke. Even worse, if people don't get the reference, they're liable to walk away from this scene just wondering what on earth happened here. To ask, what is this? The writing style is totally different. These people don't sound like people. Everything is just awkward. I felt that the Teen Titans Go reference during Beast Boy's psychotic breakdown was also misplaced. After all, it turned a serious character moment into a weird joke too. But this is even worse. That at least had the excuse of being a strange, hallucinatory experience. On top of that, it was potentially building upon the idea that Beast Boy felt his trauma was being used for entertainment purposes. This though?
Oh, my spectacles! Oh, gratitude!
This makes it hard for me to take the Outsiders seriously at all. Unfortunately, there are other issues with the way the show presents its ideas. There's a bunch of reasons for this, but the first reason is that there's a whole lot of news scenes, even more than in the Outsiders' first half. I mean, there's a point where there's a news show within a news show within a news show. Overall, I think there are two reasons why the show keeps coming back to these scenes. First, these scenes create more of a focus on media in general. Considering all the social media talk, it's pretty obvious that that's a focus for these episodes. And these news scenes present another way of building on top of that focus. Second, this is a natural way to have characters say what they're thinking and feeling in a simple way that's directed right at the audience. This way, the writers can introduce key plot points and explain information to the audience without it feeling awkward. Unfortunately, that means that at a point, these news scenes end up feeling like a crutch the show leans on. Don't get me wrong, having a few news scenes is fine, but the repetition of them gets incredibly boring. Basically, instead of explaining or showing things in varied and creative ways, I knew there would be yet another news scene around the corner. And once I knew that, it was yet another reason to stop caring about what would happen next. But this isn't the only crutch the show leans on. No, the show has many crutches. Unfortunately, these aren't just crutches that pop up in the second half either. They've been around since the start of Outsiders. Outsiders, more than any other season of Young Justice by far, uses loads of animation shortcuts. Now, some shortcuts are inevitable, and if they're used well enough, they're either hard to notice or even impossible to notice. In fact, I'm sure they were present to some extent in the previous seasons. As long as they're used wisely, they likely won't stick out. But when used all the time and super obviously, well, that's a different story. At the worst points, Outsiders uses static shots, panning over them or slightly moving images of characters to give a bit of depth. To the show's credit, they tend to do this during flashbacks or montages. Admittedly, this is far less distracting than if, say, the character suddenly froze during a battle. But these moments still feel like horrible missed opportunities to do something different, to use different art styles or different color palettes, for example. Even my favorite episode in Outsiders, the episode centered around Vandal Savage, falls victim to this. Still, it wouldn't be hard for me to overlook these moments if the show looked good most of the time, but I really don't think it does. Animations tend to be stiff. Flying characters often just go from point A to B with no changes in their body whatsoever. Similar looking shots are used repeatedly. Characters' facial expressions and head positions look like they've been copy and pasted from scene to scene. Another issue with the presentation comes from these characters. The problem here? The voice actor. Because all these characters are voiced by the same person. Some of these characters are very minor, but others aren't. Carrie Payton is a great voice actor. I loved how he did both Aqualad and Black Manta. But here, he's being stretched too thin. It's distracting when, from scene to scene, I can recognize the same actor filling multiple roles. There are other problems with the audio too, though. See, early on in the season, a character mentions that there's no sound in space. From there, whenever a battle occurs in space, there are no sound effects. While this might be realistic, it's awkward to watch. Everything loses its impact. Trying to be realistic by removing sound effects in space isn't necessarily a bad idea, but simply removing the sound effects isn't a good way to go about this. Instead, I think they should have had music replace most of the effects. Booming brass, soaring woodwinds and strings, bombastic percussion. All of it could have been used to emulate sounds in space, while still keeping space itself realistically silent. But I have to ask, why did this all happen? Why have no sound effects in space? Why reuse the same voice actors so many times? Why use all these animation shortcuts? I can't say for certain, but my guess is that they had to. They probably had to stretch their budget over these 26 episodes, and I mean stretch it. Because no one wants to do this stuff. I don't think the creators went into this going, you know what, let's just reuse the same voice actor, it's fine, we'll do it a whole bunch of times. No, they did that because it's cheaper and easier. Or I guess the other possibility is that they were rushed. That they weren't given the time they needed to properly complete these episodes. Or maybe this is the case of a good old 1-2 punch of not enough budget and get this done now. Regardless of that though, the unfortunate truth is that this is the show. Even if I can try to find reasons for why this happened, that doesn't make watching Outsiders more enjoyable. Besides, there are bigger problems than this disappointing presentation. As I've already mentioned a couple times, the main plot of this season is the Outsiders attempting to gain a social media presence and then later, their confrontation with Granny Goodness. Unfortunately, the major story beats of this plotline feel like little more than a string of coincidences and contrived situations stapled together. Basically, any obstacle that could serve as a challenge for the characters is instead dealt with due to some sort of unpredictable plot device or as a matter of course. Let's run through some of the major ones. In episode 16, the heroes hold a fair for meta-human youth. During that fair, Beast Boy's girlfriend gets kidnapped, so this group of young heroes, who will soon be the Outsiders, go after her. However, once they rescue her, they realize this kidnapping was a ruse. The villains didn't want her, they wanted to kidnap all these meta-humans at the fair. Somehow, despite the fact that the heroes are a long way out looking for Beast Boy's girlfriend, they still get back to the fair in time and rescue all the metahumans. But how did they get back in time? I mean, the villains had this planned out, the metahumans were unconscious. How is it possible that these heroes went after Simon and got back there before they could even load up some unconscious teens? The characters got back in time because they needed to get back in time for the plot to progress. In episode 18, the Outsiders go to fight Clarion. However, as soon as he starts to pose a real threat to the Outsiders, Zatanna uses a magical spell that instantly defeats the monster Clarion's created. Then she carries Clarion out of there. This way, a side character neuters a big threat. As such, she robs the Outsiders of an important opportunity to grow as a team and to legitimize themselves to the audience. They don't deal with their threats. Someone else does. In episode 20, Cyborg needs to sit in Metron's chair to heal his body. When confronted by some heroes, Metron agrees to go to Cyborg's location. But once there, Metron reveals that he intends to watch Cyborg die. So how will this conflict evolve between the heroes and Metron? Well, it doesn't. Black Lightning just zaps him, Cyborg sits in the chair, and off Metron goes. Guess Metron wasn't much of a threat after all? Again, something is just being dealt with as a matter of course. Once there isn't enough time in the episode to explore a threat, the threat is defeated instantly. In episode 24, the Outsiders need to go and save other heroes from Granny Goodness's control. They're put in an X-Pit and Granny fights Beast Boy. But while this is going on, Cyborg ends up inside Overlord's mind. There, Cyborg fights Overlord. Or, well, fight isn't really the right word. It's more like Overlord stabs him from behind and then Cyborg realizes he can't be hurt in this place. So he just beats Overlord because, as he says, he wants it more. The power of Willa, I guess? Honestly, I'm not really sure what happened here. It's just that he couldn't be beaten. There was no growth for him, no change, no way of using his intelligence to beat this situation. It was just that he wins because he's destined to win. All this is to say that, throughout the main plot of these 13 episodes, it rarely felt like the characters did anything. Instead, things happened to them, or maybe it's more accurate to say that it didn't feel like anything they did mattered. Their personalities don't matter, their motivations and challenges don't matter. What matters is that the villains apparently take forever to pack up some unconscious kids. What matters is that Zatanna was there. What matters is that Black Lightning happens to be strong enough to incapacitate Metron. What matters is that Cyborg can't be hurt when fighting Overlord here. It sucks, but yet again, Outsiders is showing us that there's no point getting invested in these characters' struggles or in the build-up to a major plot point. Because a lot of the time, something that could have never been predicted will just happen. Basically, threats only mean something until the point that that threat becomes an inconvenience for the plot. Okay, so that's all pretty negative, but how are the other plots handled? After all, there's a lot more to this season than the Outsiders stuff alone. First, there's the plot where the smaller group of heroes is secretly coordinating all the other heroes. Of course, this is related to the Outsiders plot, since the Outsiders realize that they too have been being manipulated. This also relates to Black Lightning, since he's particularly upset about all the deception. In the end though, the heroes realize that they need to be upfront and honest with each other. After all this is said and done, Black Lightning is given an important leadership role in the Justice League. Second, there's Superboy's similar growth into a full-fledged leader. Over the course of this season, Superboy has helped many heroes find a better place in the world. But towards the end of Outsiders, he takes Forager to Geranium City. Here, many xenomorphs have been living above ground disguised as humans. If Forager lives here, he will occasionally be able to drop his guard to look like himself, instead of masquerading as a human. But Forager and the other xenomorphs here don't want to hide anymore. They want to truly be a part of human society, to work at being accepted as they are instead of pretending to be something else. As such, Superboy has an opportunity to be a leader, to be a hero, on a larger scale than ever before by revealing that he's a clone of Superman. Of course, he does just that, and in doing so delivers a devastating blow to Lex Luthor's reputation. I like the ideas present in both of these plots. At the start of this season, Black Lightning could hardly even bring himself to be a hero. However, because he consistently holds himself and others accountable for their actions, he's become something greater, become a moral guide of sorts for the rest of the League to follow. Similarly, Superboy is facing an important insecurity and fear he's had for a long time, that people won't accept him, that they won't trust him if they learn where he came from. In both cases, these characters are being rewarded for their growth, are making decisions that impact the plot of Outsiders and feel natural. But the problem, once again, is that these potentially great ideas aren't given much time. I won't harp on this too much since I've already complained about this enough, especially in the previous part of this video, but the show is juggling so many plots that even the potentially good ones don't manage to properly stand out. That's to say that these ideas are great, but their execution is merely okay. Again, that's because I haven't seen enough of these struggles, enough of these characters. The show just wasn't focused enough. So yeah, I might be able to appreciate what's going on here, but I don't really care about it on a personal level. Regardless, there are two more arcs I want to discuss. The first one is probably what I was looking forward to seeing explored the most this season. Artemiss's grief over losing Wally. I was curious to see how the show would handle something like that, how it would dig into its characters in their most crushing moments. Since they've been living together, Artemiss's grief is largely intertwined with her relationship with Will Harper. While they seem to view themselves as just friends, other people seem to be pushing them together romantically, but in order for that to be the case, Artemiss would first need to deal with her grief. Eventually, Will sets up a romantic evening for them on Valentine's Day and they kiss. But Artemiss isn't down to smooch, so she runs off crying. She meets with Zatanna and demands that she uses magic to let her speak with Wally one last time, to get some closure. When Zatanna refuses, Artemiss threatens to make a deal with someone else, says she'll find some other way to get it done. So Zatanna agrees, but tells Artemiss she only has till sunrise. From here, Artemiss gets to spend an evening with Wally, but it's an evening that stretches on for a long time. She gets married, gets pregnant, has a kid. Her and Wally get the happy life they wanted together, but then it starts crumbling around her. Of course, she's forced to leave, but after that, she feels like she's worked through what she needed to work through, like she's gotten some closure she so badly needed. But there's one issue. This wasn't really Wally. This was a psychic illusion created by Miss Martian. Artemiss's mind was making everything up. In the end, Zatanna says that maybe they'll tell her one day, or maybe they never will. Now, I think this is messed up. I mean, fooling your friend into thinking they just got to speak with their dead loved one. Sure, their intentions are good, but think about the emotional damage that could cause in the long run if she ever figures it out. Think about the level of betrayal Artemiss would feel when, in one of her most desperate emotional moments, the friend she went to for help decided the best course of action was to lie to her. I might think this is morally reprehensible, but that doesn't make it bad storytelling. I mean, characters are allowed to do bad things. Often a bit of moral ambiguity makes characters more interesting than they'd otherwise be, more nuanced. So my problem isn't anything to do with how moral this is. My problem is that this runs counter to Miss Martian's arc, because she was one of those heroes secretly getting all these separate teams to work together. She's one of these heroes who supposedly regrets doing that and thinks it was wrong. She's the one who previously learned the hard way that using her psychic powers in immoral ways can backfire very badly. So what made her do this to Artemiss? Why would she make a decision that runs so counter to her arc before and immediately after this moment? Who knows? We don't get any explanation. This just feels wrong to me. If the 4th season of Young Justice comes to fruition, maybe this will get addressed. I hope it'll get addressed. But that doesn't change the fact that, at this moment, I don't understand why Miss Martian would make a decision that runs so counter to the rest of her arc. Yet again, it feels like her personality is getting reset, like she's just going back to her old, crappy ways for no real reason beyond the fact that it happened to work plot-wise at this moment in the story. With all that out of the way, it's time to talk about Brianna and Halo, and by extension, their romantic relationship. Of course, they're having a pretty good time until Halo remembers something. Gabrielle Dow's actions led to the murder of Brianna's parents. In addition, Helga Jace lies to her, telling her that she's dying. From there, Halo grows more distant from everyone. And who can blame her? She's attempting to come to grips with her own mortality. When she tells Brianna and Tara about her memories of Gabrielle Dow's life, they don't react well, and she runs away to tell Gabrielle's parents what happened to her. However, she and Brianna seem to patch things up. That is, until the very end of the season, when Brianna murders his uncle and takes the throne from his brother. When I watched this, it immediately struck me as odd. For all of Brianna's faults, it seemed like this was out of character. Sure, at the start of Outsiders, I definitely think he would have murdered his uncle. But now I'm not so sure. He's much more patient. Beyond that, I really didn't think he would steal the throne from his brother and cast away his sister and Halo for not joining him. And apparently I was right, because the United Nations ambassador for Markovia is a member of the Light. And he's a metahuman who can manipulate emotions and nudge people towards their worst instincts. Which explains my issue with Brianna's actions. Yet somehow it annoyed me more than no explanation. And that's because there was no way to predict that the ambassador would do this. This is yet another example of some plot twist taking precedence over character development. Yet another example of character arcs not really mattering. Yet another example of introducing another element into the story when there are already way too many. Sure, Outsiders' first half was a bit messy and unfocused, but I didn't hate it. Unfortunately though, the second half is so much worse. While I didn't mind some of the episodes, there genuinely wasn't a single one that I actually enjoyed. I mentioned earlier how I'm not a comic book fan, how that might have negatively impacted my opinion of this season. And that's true, I'm sure it could have. But being a comic book fan wouldn't fix all these contrivances, all these last-minute twists, all these resets to character development. For the people who got a season that they enjoyed, that they liked, I'm happy that's the case. That's great. Many people waited 6 years for this, and I hope that they would enjoy it. For me though, now that I've finished Outsiders, I can honestly say that I just don't care about Young Justice anymore.